Hey guys, and welcome back to the Spruce and Linen channel. I'm Janelle, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this woven wall hanging. So we recently put fiber packs into the Etsy shop, and this is using a bunch of materials that I'm now selling in the Etsy shop depending on when you're watching this video. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is our tools and materials. So the only tools that you won't find in the Etsy shop are a piece of cardstock for the bottom of your weaving, a dowel. I'm going to be using a 3/4 inch dowel by 9 inches, and a pair of scissors. Everything else you see here, we do sell in the Etsy shop. Hopefully, depending on when you're watching this video, the fiber packs might not be available, but the tools likely will still be available. So first we have this wool blend chunky yarn. I love using this for fringe yarn. We have 1 ounce of Merino Roving. We have 50 ounces of 2 different colors of this beautiful merino yarn, nice and thin. Then we have 50 grams of 4.2 millimeter cotton rope, 30 grams of 3 millimeter cotton rope, and this beautiful velvet. So this is velvet ribbon. I hand rip them myself and trim them up so they're nice and clean. And this one in particular is 54 inches long. So in the Etsy shop, again, depending on when you're watching this video, this right here is fiber pack number 5. This is sold separately, and everything here is sold separately. So I started selling these little cards of warp string just on their own. It's 25 yards. I thought this would be really handy if you were just getting into weaving. This is almost like a build your own kit. So if you got the fiber pack, the fringe yarn, a little thing of warp string, and then the tools, you'd be all set. So we do sell these flat pack frame looms, tapestry needles. We also have walnut tapestry needles and weaving combs. All right, so we're gonna jump right in here. And the first thing we're gonna do is we're going to cut our fringe before we actually put this on. I really love using the actual loom to wrap my fringe around before cutting it. So if you don't have anything else with you, you can definitely use your loom to do that. For this project, I'm going to be warping 30 strings onto my loom, which means we have 15 groups of 2 that we'll be wrapping our fringe around. I like to use 3 strands of this yarn for the fringe, so I'm going to need 45 pieces of this yarn for my fringe. All right, so now I'm going to cut this fringe off of the loom, making sure that I'm only cutting through this top layer that we've wrapped and not both layers, because then we will ruin our fringe. So I'm just kind of cutting along the actual loom so I make sure I don't cut through that second layer. All right, so now we can set this fringe aside, and we're going to put our warp onto the loom. So if you've been watching my YouTube channel for a while, you know that I'm a big fan of warping with odd amounts of string. But for this project, we're actually going to use these upper loops to tie around this dowel. So that'll be a new lesson in this video. So we want an even amount, and we want to make sure that our knots are at the bottom underneath the fringe, not at the top. Now that I have 30 strings on my loom, I'm going to cut myself a piece. Leave yourself a little bit of room to tie your knot. And I'm just going to make sure that I keep this last warp string tight while I tie this last knot here. And that's looking pretty good there. Before I put my cardstock in, I'm just going to run my hand on this warp and make sure that it's all even. I can tell that this last string, which usually happens, is a little bit loose, so I'm just gonna start evening out that slack. And now I'm going to take my approximately 2.5 inches wide piece of cardstock, and I'm going to just weave that in plain weave. Okay, so now we've got that in there. I'm going to weave going back to our fringe yarn, I'm gonna weave 6 rows of plain weave. Actually, with this yarn is pretty thick, so I'm just gonna do 5. So I'm just kind of measuring it out so I don't have a ton of waste at the end. Okay, so I ended up doing 6 rows just because I had enough yarn to do so. Check out our 3-part mini woven wall hanging series, and you can get all the details for how you can get a slower walkthrough of how to do all the things I'm doing. So I'm not going to show you in detail the Raya knots this time around because we've showed it in a few other videos, and I will stick a link on the screen here so that you can find one of those. Okay, so now we have all our fringe on the loom, so we're gonna get started weaving. If you've never woven with a thinner yarn, like this would be something that would be more common in knitting, but sometimes you just find the most beautiful colors in a thinner yarn, and you can definitely use it for tapestry, even when you have your warp strings really far apart like this. And what I like to do is I basically, with something this thin, like to quadruple the yarn. So I'm just gonna take a nice big length here, and I'm literally just gonna double it over, and then again, and again, so that we have 4 strands going here. So the first thing we're gonna do, so now I have 4 strands and I have 4 strands. So now I'm gonna just kind of fold them over in half, and we're gonna go to the other end and find that fold. And I'm gonna start with a sumac stitch. And this sumac stitch, we're going to do both rows at the same time. And the way you do this, you have a loop in your hands here. You take all of this under, bring it through, and I'm just gonna let that go totally tight like that. And then we're just gonna keep doing that all the way across. So you have 2 sections here. You reach underneath 2 strings, bring that through, and pull it around, and you will see the sumac stitch come out. So now I'm going to turn around and go back the other direction. So I'm bringing these over to the left, and I'm going to skip these because I just went around these, and I'm going to start going around these too. And it's the same thing, just in reverse. Now I'm going to turn around again, but I'm going to do one more going this direction on those same set of strings, just so I have that bulk here as if I did have a full third row. And then I'm just going to do the same thing and go back the other way. Well, I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to just tuck it behind and call this green section done. So this is another way to do organic shapes. If you caught our video last week, it was on how to create organic shapes and waves. So this is just another way of doing that. So now I'm going to tuck this behind here. So you can see we have this sort of hill shape going on here. The next I'm going to take I think this is called Marsala is the color, 3mm cotton rope. And I'm going to take a little length of this, and I'm going to do some knotting. So this is a stitch that I have not done a full tutorial on yet, and I am still kind of learning myself, but we will do a brief little bit of knotting here. First off, it is very random. I think I'm gonna do just a a row of plain weave first. So this knotting technique is definitely like very random and free form, which can be a blessing and a curse because sometimes it makes it difficult to learn in the sense that you know, your brain may want to be have it more as a pattern, and it definitely doesn't need to be. So I'm just gonna go all the way across here, and I'm gonna go back as well. Okay, so now we're gonna go into some knotting. I'm gonna take this off of my tapestry needle, and the effect of this is gonna be a little different because we're using such thin rope, but you can use it with any thickness of rope. And basically we're gonna go back around this string, and we're gonna go through that little loop and just tighten it. And that's the base of it. Is literally just knots. So you can get as creative as you like with this. You can go really random. You can kind of come back around where you just were. I feel like that's a good amount of knots in there. So I'm going to do some more plain weave now. And this is a more free form design. You can do more knotting, you can do less. It's really up to you what you want to do. Now I'm going to do some more knotting, but this time I'm going to go in with this thicker white rope. This is again a 4.2 millimeter. And what's nice about the knots is like you don't need to use very long pieces at a time when you're doing knotting, because sometimes it's nice to have that like raw edge sticking out, which is what I'm going to do now. So for this first one, I'm literally just going to create a knot, and you can always trim this off later. I'm just going to do that right now so it's a little shorter. And then I'm just going to start doing more of that knotting. Okay, so now I have a good amount of knotting in there. I think I'm going to go in just with this fringe yarn again and just do a row or two of plain weave, just to kind of bring back that evenness of the warp, because you can see our warp is kind of trying to go all over the place now. So I want to just tack that down. Okay, so next I'm gonna do some sumac stitch with this roving, and I'm gonna split it in half. I generally like to split my roving in half when I'm doing sumac stitch on a small weaving. Sometimes I do it on large ones too, but especially on a small weaving where I don't want it to be too crazy bulky, I do it this way. So I like to go over two and skip two, around two and skip two, I should say. So I'm skipping these two. So if you've never done sumac stitch, again, you can watch our 3-part mini woven wall hanging series, but I'll just show you a couple of times here. So I like to skip two and then go around two, skip two, go around two. So next I'm gonna go in with some of this beautiful velvet, and there's lots of different ways you can use fabric in your weavings. You could do sumac stitch, you can do all kinds of different stitches with it. You can use it just like as if it were yarn. I'm going to weave my velvet in over one, under one. I've already cut this piece because I did this and then I realized I did it incorrectly, so I'm doing it again. I had gone over two, under two, and realized that that is not what I had intended to do. So as usual, unweave and reweave if you need to. There is no shame in the unweave game, and it's definitely how you learn. Okay, so what I've done here, I'm gonna pull this all the way over, and hopefully this piece is long enough now. And I'm just gonna leave a tiny little tail, and then in the middle, I'm gonna start bunching. So I'm just bringing little bits of the velvet, and we can shift this around later again, but through each part where the velvet is going over a string, I'm just like pulling it out so that we have some really nice texture here. And don't worry if it's not staying exactly where you want it just yet, because we can fix that later. Okay, so now we have this texture with the velvet, which I really like, because if you're going to use velvet, you kind of want that sheen to really come through, and the more you texture it, the more the light hits it in different ways and really shows that beautiful velvet texture. So now I'm going to go with this green yarn, which I've done, once again, quadrupled it up, and I'm just going to do plain weave, opposite of what I just did with the velvet. So I'm going to start with under and then over, and this is essentially just going to tack down what we just did with the velvet. So now that we have this plain weave with the yarn, you can kind of manipulate that velvet again and pull it out a little bit, and it'll stay better. But I'm really liking the way that that's looking, so I'm going to keep going, and I'm just always like sort of tucking and moving as I go to make sure things are where I want them to be and looking how I want them to. So next I'm going to do some Rya loops, and we're going to use the mustard yarn for this. Once again, I'm going to quadruple up this yarn as well. And I'm just going to do, I don't know, a couple of arm lengths and then quadruple it. Rya loops use up a lot of yarn, so it's a good idea to make sure you have a decent amount. In the meantime, when I look at that camera, I'm realizing how messy I'm getting, but I am definitely a messy weaver, and I'm okay with that. All part of the process. Okay, so I'm gonna start doing some Rya loops, and I'm just going to do my first one. I'm gonna literally just pick a warp string, and I'm gonna just tie a knot. And I'm gonna tuck that end back down behind, and that will get tucked into the back of the weaving later. Now just a quick refresher on Rya loops. You're gonna go under a string. You have this loop in your left hand like this. You're gonna pull a loop, and then you're gonna use the bottom section of the loop right here, and you're gonna tighten up that loop. And you can make these random sizes. I'm just gonna do a bunch of rows of these, and after every row of Rya loops, I'm gonna take this same yarn and do a row of plain weave, just to hold everything together properly. And if you wanna see this a little bit more in depth, you can check out our Rya loops tutorial video. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back to this green yarn, and I'm gonna do a few more rows of plain weave, and I'm gonna go right all the way across over top of these Rya loops we just created. So now I'm gonna go back in with more of the knotting technique that we used with this thicker natural cotton yarn. And you can see that I'm just kind of like staggering my materials and kind of going back and forth and keeping it somewhat random. But it is all just an experiment, so you can play around with different layouts if you like. So I'm gonna do one more double sumac, kind of like this side over here. Now you're probably seeing me pull everything down a little bit. I'm trying to make sure I have enough string up here that I can finish this the way I want to, and I'm feeling a little bit uncertain I will. So I'm gonna go back to this 3mm rope now, and I'm going to do a bunch more rye loops over here. Alright, so I kind of just filled out this little gap with the rye loops, so it's just kind of random and going back and forth and filling it in so that we're getting a little bit closer to being straight at the top of our weaving. And I'm just going to tuck this back. Now, the last thing we're gonna do before we're finished the weaving portion of this wall hanging is do about 3 rows of our chunky yarn again. I'm just gonna take a lot extra because I'm also gonna do a hem stitch. So I'm gonna just quickly do 3 rows of plain weave and then do a hem stitch. So yet again, if you need to learn how to do a hem stitch, you can check out our hem stitch video. So now the weaving portion of this wall hanging is done. I'm gonna flip this over and start tucking in the ends. Now I'm going to put on my loom legs while I'm doing this so that I don't squish my sumac stitch. And we're just gonna clean this up now. For the velvet, I'm tucking it in the same kind of way that I tuck in the roving, but very loosely so that we keep those loops on the front end. So I'm just kind of letting it sit where it wants to there. Okay, so all those ends are now tucked in and I'm ready to take this off of the loom. So the way we're gonna do that, we're not gonna cut any strings on the top here, but instead we're gonna cut these ones on the bottom to get them off. Linen is a very not stretchy material, so that's why I'm going to have to actually cut this off the loom. I'm gonna slide my cardstock out first. Do a little cleanup again. And then I'm just gonna start cutting my ends off. Now normally I like to do overhead knots with these little guys, but they're so short. I'm just gonna do a square knot instead. All right, so we're coming close to finishing this up. I'm just gonna tuck in all these ends. Again, this whole process you can find in the 3rd part of our 3-part mini woven wall hanging series. But essentially all you do is you get your needle through a few of these weft strings and then thread your needle with your warp strings, pull it through, and then we'll cut off the excess at the end. Okay, so I had to switch to a smaller dowel. This is a 5/8 dowel. My loops simply were not long enough by the time I was done my weaving to get that bigger dowel in. I think the first time I made this weaving, I didn't do as many plain weave rows at the very bottom, and I think my cardboard was a little thinner as well, but that's okay. You can totally use a thinner dowel. So I'm going to just do this in groups of 3, so that's where our 30 warp strings worked out really well, so that we have 5 groups of 3. And I opened them all up, so my finger is just like through the loops, and I'm gonna open them like this, turn it like so, and then you create a little channel with that loop. And then you're gonna just put your dowel through all those loops Now I'll show you with one string just so you can understand what I'm doing. So you open up the loop, turn it back down like this, and then you have this loop channel here. So pretend my finger is the dowel there, and it just tightens up like that. And then we're doing them in groups just for like a different look. Now you can always go back and just kind of pull it tight afterwards, but I'm not gonna worry too much about that right now. So again, I'm gonna grab 3 loops. I'm gonna open them up together. Turn that backwards and creating this channel and putting our dowel through the channel. You can see we have that cute little gathered look, and you can always go back in and just kind of make sure those strings are sitting the way that you want. And this is kind of one of those ones I could keep tightening these over and over again, but they'll loosen up when they're not under tension. Okay, so now I'm going to tie myself a little hanging string on here. And then if you want to be done, you can be done. I am going to steam and cut the fringe. So I'm going to steam it out and then cut it straight on the bottom. And once again, we've got a tutorial for that too, and that is in the third part of the 3-part mini woven wall hanging series. Now for this one, for my hanging string, since we have these groups, I kind of want to replicate that with my hanging string. So I'm actually gonna like wrap around 1, 2, 3, 4, thinking about 5 strings. So I'm gonna make sure I have enough length there. And then as far as the length of your hanging string goes, personally I like kind of an in-between. So I don't like going super short like this because it has a tendency to want to suck these in. And I personally don't love going super long because I think it just looks unproportioned. So one good way of doing it is you can kind of like, this one is a little bit long, so that looks a little long to me, but I just kind of eyeball it. And let's see here. That looks about right to me. So I'm gonna hold it there. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm just gonna wrap that around, give myself some slack. All right, so I'm gonna go steam and cut my fringe, and then I will show you this when it's all finished. All right, you guys, so here is the finished product. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. I think it's really cute, and I hope you guys enjoy making this as well. And again, you can find the fiber packs in my Etsy shop depending on when you're watching this video, and of course you can use your own materials to create it as well. All right, you guys, so I hope you've enjoyed this little weaving tutorial. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell to get notifications when I post new videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.